Malkus. My name is Beth Malkus Staffa, and I am with the Ohio Department of Health Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Prevention Program. And it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Arki and Dr. Ray. I have had the pleasure of working with them for, I want to say 2 years maybe, on the statewide plan. And thinking of colors, I think of them as both bold and bright colors and with soft edges. And why I say soft edges is that they're teaching us new ways of looking at our movement with their practices. And I hope that the experience this afternoon, you will understand why I say they are bold and bright colors, but soft edges in guiding us through this work. So I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Arki.
All right, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Again, many of you I saw just a couple of hours ago, so definitely excited to be back with you. I'm Dr. Arki. My pronouns are she, they, and ella. Thank you, Beth, so much for that wonderful welcome. In this session, we will be speaking about the state action plan. As Beth mentioned, we've been working on this plan for a couple of years now, and we'll talk about the other things that Beth mentioned around how we at Sankofa Circle decided to approach this plan with this work. We will also be focusing on some strategic areas of the plan, and then we will be asking for your feedback. So we ask you all to listen in the beginning, listen intently, and prepare to give feedback on the things that we are discussing. A part of this plan, as you will see, as we have built it, there are gaps in the plan intentionally, and those gaps are for the people who are on the front line doing this work. So without further ado, I want to jump right in. I'll allow my co-presenters to introduce themselves, and then we will begin talking about the plan. So I'll turn it over first to Dr. Ray.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Ray. My pronouns are she and they. I'm so happy to share this virtual space with you all this afternoon and looking forward to spending time and learning from each of you.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Thomas. My pronouns are she and her. I'm thrilled to be joining you from Cleveland, Ohio, and glad to be able to jump back into this work after a little bit of time. Some of you may remember I was able to connect with you all in person in the before times in Columbus, so I'm glad to be back, and I'll send it back to Dr. Arki.
Awesome, thank you, thank you. So we'll go ahead and I'll begin to share my screen if I can get those permissions. We have a document here that we want you to be able to follow along with. Admittedly, we will not spend a lot of time on this particular document because we want to make sure that we have opportunity for conversation and reflection. So, okay.
Sorry, Dr. Arki, I hate to. I did make you a co-host. I will, if those controls don't work, I will try something different.
Yeah, it's not quite letting me access it. I'm not sure why.
Let me try one more thing. Okay. I am going to make you the host, so that should work.
Okay. One second while we get our tech together, everyone. Okay. It's still not allowing me.
Let me try one more thing.
Maybe you can check with Dr. Ray. Maybe if you can allow Dr. Ray to have some privileges, maybe she can share from her end.
So it seems that I've now made you the host. Let me see here 1 second.
Okay, I'll ask Dr. Ray to kind of work on this text. And so we don't have too much dead air. I'm just going to continue to talk until we can get the screen share up. So bear with us. But I know we've been in the Zoom world for a little while, so I know this isn't the first tech issue that we've had. So we started working on this plan in the fall of 2019 when our world was a very different place. The State Action Planning Committee had already been working on the plan when Sankofa Circle was invited into the group. So Nicole and I actually was able to go to Columbus to spend time with the leaders who are a part of the State Action Plan Committee. So really looking at the state as a whole, thinking about all of us, our geographic locations, how we are able to do this work in rural areas, in urban areas, and all of the places in between, thinking about who identifies at the margins in those particular places. Even when we look at the entire state of Ohio, we can look at our larger cities like Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo. But when we talk about this work statewide, we have to look at all of those places in between, all of those rural areas, and think about how folks are identifying and what services do they need. When we think about prevention and intervention as it deals with sexual violence, domestic violence, and intimate partner violence, we really wanted to keep those things at the forefront. So we began to do this work in the form of an anti-oppression training. So we really wanted to set the tone for an anti-oppression framework. So thinking about all of the intersections that we have when we think about anti-oppression, often we're thinking about places, identities that we can see, identities that we can name, and which is really why we wanted to push to have this work to not just be anti-racist. We wanted this work to be anti-oppressive because yes, race is an important part of this work, very foundational for the work that we do professionally, personally, based on where we are in the United States of America. So not to say that race is not important, but understanding that our race impacts our other identities. And so as a state, how can we really create a framework? How can we create a unified thought process around how we begin to do this work, how we begin to interrupt violence for survivors? And so this is really where we came. And I want to just invite Nicole to jump in at any point. Thank you, Dr. Ray, for getting the text set up for us. So we began to define this anti-oppressive framework. And we came up with a group definition to begin to do that. And then in addition to that, we talked about our approach to really move beyond diversity, equity, and intersectionality and really include, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and include intersectionality. So right there, I want to pause and turn it over to Nicole. Nicole, as she stated in her introduction, did some of the initial work with us to get this project started. And then Dr. Ray came and joined the team. But in addition to this work, Nicole has a wide variety of working with organizations that are in this particular line of work. So really looking at social enterprise, nonprofits that are justice focused, folks that are on the line, like we talked about earlier today. I identify as a frontline practitioner along with all of you. When we are working with community, I believe that that's the front line. So I want to turn it over to Nicole to talk a little bit about a DEI framework and then moving into the intersectionality piece and why that's so important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Arki. Like I said, it's great to be back here with all of you. And I'm really thrilled that we have an opportunity to revisit some of the complexities and opportunities that this framework provides. It's not uncommon that you'll see the words diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's something that in the last, I'd say, year, especially with the pandemic and this uprising revolution, organizations have had the spotlight shown upon them internally and externally, and DEI feels like the way to go. But what's important is what Dr. Arki mentioned, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion exists when we add in intersectionality. When we add in an intersectional approach, we can really sort of supercharge our ability to get clear on our identities, where we exist on the framework of power, and what we can do together, what our work is as individuals and what our work is together. So you'll see here on the screen that the framework that's been put together really is clear on understanding that the work that exists to do is both in relationship to ourselves as individuals and on the larger scale in terms of institutions and systems. So you've got a multi sort of approach in terms of your macro and your micro. But the intersectional piece, right, is really, really important because we can rely on the good and brilliant work of Black feminists to deliver the background of intersectionality, which is really understanding that none of our identities, right, we don't live single identity lives, right? And that in particular, those identities are important to place along a framework of power. So I can't say that I am doubly oppressed as a person who is a queer Black woman and left-handed, because my relationship to power as a left-handed person isn't nearly as identifiable as it is about my relationships to power as a Black woman and a queer woman, right? So we really wanted to emphasize the importance of naming where the intersectional approaches come from, but to know that all of this is really important because, like Dr. Arki said, when we think about intimate partner violence, when we think about sexual violence, there are so many touchstones and so many such touch points that if we don't hold that intersectional lens, we are bound to lose some perspectives. We're bound to overlook some important components of our approach. So that's a bit about sort of where we are. Dr. Arki, would you like anything further on that piece?
I think that's great. Thank you for that. And just to follow up on that, in addition to this intersectional framework, part of our methodology also included creating counter narratives and storytelling. Often when folks do the work of strategic planning or strategy and operations, there's lots of quantitative data, lots of numbers. How many places did you reach? How many touches? How many times have you seen this person or this agency or been in this community? And we really wanted to expand that. We thought that it was important to expand that concept to include the qualitative nature of this work. Like, yes, we can talk about how many times someone came to receive services, but we also want to talk about making sure they got what they need. So how many times did it take them to come into the office in order for them to tell their story, in order for them to meet with different folks on our internal team to get their needs met? So that's really what we are looking to do with this plan, is to shift from this quantitative methodology in which, being a part of the nonprofit industrial complex is there, right? That's a part of how we've been trained. And quite frankly, there's still a part of that we're going to have to do if we want to continue to get funding from particular places, i.e. the state and government dollars. Some of those things we're still going to have to report back quantitatively. But moving forward, in an effort to begin to center the voices of the most marginalized, how can we take that quantitative data and begin to tell the story and begin to amplify the message of those folks who are at those intersections that Nicole talked about? Who are the most marginalized in our communities? Why do they need our services? And what's our duty as institutions and organizations to respond to that? How do we need to change in order to remain relevant? How do we need to show up in order to meet the needs of the community? And so now we see on our screen is we really went through and talked about what anti-oppressive organizations may look like, sound like, and feel like. And over the course of this planning session, we've had 4 large group sessions or full day sessions with the planning team. And we'll list the planning team a little bit later so you can know who's all on the planning team. But thinking about the 4 sessions, we really spent on building a framework, adding intersectionality to our already happening or established DEI frameworks in our organization, but then thinking about what does that look like operationally. So really looking at our locality development, where are we located, our geographic location, and to begin to tell the historical narrative about being there, not just about our organization. We have to do that. We have to tell the truth about how and why our organizations were founded, but also look into that geographic location, into that region, into that city, into that township, into that urban area, into that rural area, and learn about the work that has been happening before the work that you begin doing there to inform your practice. Really thinking about social development. So beginning to highlight the importance of human capital, thinking about how we build networks. When we think about our geographic location, the next layer is to add the people in there. So where are the people? Where are our social networks? Where are they strong? Where do we need to grow them? Next, looking at this active participation. As we think about our social networks, where can we add people? Thinking about how everyone identifies differently, where can we add them? And this is a really critical point, and this is what we are attempting to model for you today as the second part of our presentation, is how do we begin to add the people who are most affected, and how can we begin to amplify their message? So with that, also looking at the structural analysis of the problem, understanding that this is an issue that has been there before our organization existed. There's a structural issue that's happening, and we are, our organizations began to respond to that. So let's get back to the issue, and how has that issue shifted based on these other characteristics, but on the one thing that we cannot control, and that's our socio-political context. And we've seen those shifts happen so much within the past 18 months, even as we've been writing this plan, which has really made us think differently about how we're approaching problem, issues, and gaps. And again, how are we using this plan to really amplify the voices of the most marginalized? The consciousness raising and the social action really go hand in hand. And that again comes with the information that we are putting in the plan, but allowing the voices of the most marginalized. As you can see, that's kind of in the center of the characteristics of anti-oppressive organizations. Because when we really think about doing this work, we can't just think about the way that things are. We also have to think about the way that things should be. And so really finding a balance between how things are happening, how can we respond to that? But then in the future, visioning, planning, what does that world look like where we're living in a world that's free from violence? If we reach back to our own organizational mission and vision, purpose statements, value statements, essentially, we want to rid the world of the violence that folks are encountering in their day-to-day interactions. And so when we think about that in a broad scope, how can we connect our work in Ohio from institution to institution, from organization to organization, to make sure that the folks in Lima are getting what they need, in addition to the people who are in Delaware County, in addition to the people who are in Over the Rhine in Cincinnati. So now we want to transition into the strategic priorities. And I'm going to talk about them a little bit, and then we're definitely going to open this up for some conversation. So as we begin to synthesize the data that we've collected, we found these 4 priority areas. And the first one is developing the SAPC way. And the SAPC is what we're using for State Action Planning Committee. So how are we dealing with one another? How are we dealing with the people in our community? Our goal here is to really establish a set of benchmarks for how we identify SP and DV IP programs in the state of Ohio, and how we as organizations will respond to them. What are those baseline things that, independent of who we're working with or where we are working, we as organizations need to provide? So really identifying what those are and sharing those across the state. Next would be to develop a statewide policy and advocacy agenda. So understanding the crux of the work that we do is driven by state and even local policies. We'll say state, this is a statewide project that we're working on, but we know the local policies come into play and even national policies, right? But really focusing on a statewide policy and advocacy agenda that across the state, we can find out what those issues are and work collectively to advance them. So this means aligning our advocacy work across the state, across all of the different intersections, but how they show up, particularly for folks who have been affected by DPIP or SV. Next, we have building a community of practice through partner responsibilities. So really understanding that our role here is to work together. We talked a lot about collaboration versus competition. So it becomes so important for us to begin to work together and not in competition with one another. We also know that just being in the work that we do, receiving many of the funding sources, many of the funding sources that we receive come from the same place. And so often that requires us to work together. But what we really want this action plan to focus on is to really push past that and to build a community of practice. That's where everyone understands their role, everyone understands what they're bringing, and everyone has contributed to this end goal. So what does that end goal look like, sound like, and feel like? And that's what we're creating with this action plan, with this strategic plan. And we are helping to plug you all into this as members of the community. There'll be an opportunity today, but then ongoing opportunities throughout the rest of 2021 to hear your voice about what it's like on the front line doing this work. And then lastly, the last strategic recommendation that we have is through partnerships, collaboration, and community impact. And it really goes hand in hand with building this community of practice, making sure that these partnerships and this collaboration is really focused on meeting the needs of the most marginalized, and that we are standardizing these practices, that we're aligning them, but then also that we integrate them and that we leverage them with one another. There are so many, I know we use this analogy a lot about reinventing the wheel. And so we don't want to continue to do that. We want to build a comprehensive plan across the state that plugs in folks where they operate best, but also understanding how they connect to one another and beginning to curate the space for organizations and institutions to connect, to build power, and not necessarily just on a way of connecting through a grant or because of a grant. So we want that bottom line to be about building power. And to do that, we have to go back to the very beginning. As Nicole talked about, yes, we use this DEI in our organizational framework, but when we begin to build power and amplify the voices of the most marginalized, it's going to require us to be in relationship with one another differently. We're going to have to see ourselves and see one another differently in order to really make those connections and work towards that long-term sustainable change. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Dr. Ray, who is going to take us through a little bit of a feedback loop.
And I apologize for having to quickly interrupt. Dr. Arki, I'm not sure if you saw my message. My guess is that you didn't, but I'm wondering if you can add a spotlight to ASL interpreter Anne-Marie for us.
Sure.
And awesome. Thank you so much.
Please give me just 1 second while I get out of tech mode and get this link pulled up. Alrighty, hello again, everyone. I'm going to be placing a link in the chat to our Padlet today. Please let me know if you're able to click on it, see it, access it. Padlet is a tool that we use to get pretty clear, immediate feedback as we're presenting. So if anyone can give me the thumbs up or drop in the chat if it's working. Okay, thank you, Lauren. Alrighty. I am going to share it as well so that everyone can see it on my end, just in case you want to follow along differently. Alrighty. So as Dr. Arki mentioned and rolled out, we have 4 specific focus areas that we've been working on for the state action plan. And when I say we, I mean, we're just helping as people go along to identify various points where we can be helpful in jogging these various focus areas, and the State Action Plan Committee is doing the real work. And so the areas that Dr. Arki already went through are listed here, but we would love, you should be able to see a comment box on your end. I hope so. Alrighty. So, all right, cool. So, what we can do is, okay, you see one now? It may have been because I was sharing my screen and I was the creator of it. Oh, okay, no. All right. So what we can do, which would be really helpful, is that as we can just drop our feedback in the chat. I'm gonna still share my screen so that you can see the captions. But ultimately, and I'm gonna share the box as well.
Dr. Ray, if it's helpful, I can just kind of gather those responses in a Google Doc and share my screen. Would that be an interim option?
Yes, that would be awesome. This is really odd.
Dr. Ray, this is Beth. If you press the plus button, you get kind of a comment box. Is that what we're looking for?
It's supposed to show up right under each box, and
okay,
I think it might be a permission thing in our Sankofa account.
Okay.
But Nicole, if you would like to do that, that would be awesome.
I'm on it.
Okay, thank you so much. First things first is that while I'm speaking, we'll get that side of things together, but developing the SAPC way is, as Dr. Arki already outlined, but one of the goals that was a key focus for that area is to cultivate and advance effective S/IPV prevention programs, which include a social justice framework. And so we're interested in seeing for each of these goals, whether you all have any feedback, have any thoughts, considering that obviously the goal across the board is to be anti-oppressive in all the work that the committee is seeking to do. And so one of the goals for that is to have this framework be the leading or guiding North Star for that work. And when I say feedback, it's just anything that may come to mind, anything that may be along the lines of resources, or what do you think your guiding light or responses would be to any of these specific areas. The second area is to develop a statewide policy and advocacy agenda. And the specific goal for that is to magnify the value and scope, one specific goal. Again, this is a work in progress, as we mentioned. So one specific goal that is to magnify the value and scope of prevention and anti-oppression work in organizations, communities, and at the state level. Next, the specific goal for focus area 3, which as Dr. Arki mentioned, is the building a community of practice through partner responsibility. This particular area has a specific goal that the committee outlined of shifting 50% or more of roles, that's inclusive of staff and board members, and sexual and intimate partner violence convening agencies through RPE and Delta Impact towards a more healthier, more equitable, and anti-oppressive organizational culture by 2025. Ultimately, that's in short, making sure that folks are on the same page for the most part with multiple agencies around the state, are really using anti-oppressive frameworks and anti-oppressive methodologies to make sure that we're speaking the same language, more or less, and not just the same language, that the opportunities to do this work together are even more robust. And last but not least, for partnerships and collaboration and community impact, the goal is to increase recognition and impact through superior organizational recognition and acknowledgement. And above all else, the creation, where we are, of a statewide multi-pronged outreach and engagement strategy that makes sure that we can do this work in more meaningful ways.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Ray. So much appreciation. So now we want to open it up for the conversation. So if we really take a look at the focus areas, the 4 focus areas or the strategic priorities, what are your initial thoughts to that? We want to allow you to join the conversation. Feel free to unmic yourself if that's how you would like to join the conversation, or you can totally use the chat box to drop your comments. Also use your reaction buttons. This is how we create community in our virtual space. So let's move into discussion. Thinking about the state action plan, the 4 areas, developing the standardized way in which we do this work, also developing a statewide policy and advocacy agenda, and then developing a community of practice through partner responsibility and really strengthening partnerships, collaboration, and deepening community impact. Initial thoughts, comments, reactions? At the bottom of your screen, there's a reactions button. If you click that, there's a raise hand option, and then we'll see your hand go up and we can pop you to the front. That way we can know that you're ready to begin. Initial thoughts or reactions to the focus areas?
Sometimes I have curiosities from folks when we look at a list like this, and I wonder which one makes you feel clearest and which one gives you the most questions. Like, I need more information about that one. I get that one, but that other one, I need to talk about that more. So which one is giving you, yep, I get it, and which ones are giving you not quite clear? Okay, you've got Annie. So partnership, collaboration, and community impact sounds really clear for folks. I'm curious to know, does anyone else agree that that's just straightforward? No questions, we're going to increase community recognition and impact through superior organizational recognition and acknowledgement? Does that feel like, yep, got it, no questions?
Totally. And then also want to lift up Bethany's comment, liking that it seems to hit all levels so that the impact won't be a heavy lift. And that's something that is really important to us at all times, because we understand what it's like working in a nonprofit where everyone has multiple roles, even if they only have one title. We've learned that trick now. You'll have multiple things to do, even if you have one title. They're really understanding that. And I think that that's why the partnerships and collaboration become so important. And we wanted to separate that out from the community of practice, because we've got to build these relationships to understand that we can have a core program that meets all of our needs or most of our organizational needs. So really understanding that concept, once we build these relationships and understand how our work is in relation to our colleagues' work, we can then begin to build those programs that really respond to the community and include many different facets or areas of practice or lines of business, however you're going to define that. But that becomes really, really important to this plan and how we move forward together to do that, not recreating the wheel.
Good afternoon, this is Bryn Farmer. I completely agree that the goal is clear. I think that in action, it might be a little bit trickier, because one of the things that I've seen is people will write into their grants, we're collaborating with this person, we're building relationships with this person, maybe before they've even connected with that person or started to build a relationship. And then in practice, it's still that kind of maybe lead rape crisis center or domestic violence shelter that's doing the work, taking over the work or co-opting the work. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit more about maybe what that looks like at the ground level, because I've seen it go so wrong in the past. I do think from an organizing perspective, I love what you were saying earlier about the relationship building piece, because I think that with those grants, when we're talking about collaboration and talking about outputs, that's what we focus on a lot, are those outputs. And we have to start focusing more on the relationship building, because I think that's where the change is going to happen, just from my own past experience as an organizer. And so I guess that's kind of a twofold thought, but I'm curious to hear about what that looks like on the ground, because I've seen it go so wrong before, even though I think that's what our goal should be. Absolutely.
Thanks so much for that question. So there's a couple of things that I want to mention these are activities that we already know are happening, and this is another opportunity for you all on the call. If there are other opportunities where you see this happening, please drop that information in the chat for us so that we can also know. So as we begin to think about the collaboration, what does it really look like in practice? There are statewide work groups that have been convened. I think they've been convening about a year now. I think they may have started mid-pandemic. It may not even be a full year at this point. But that's an output of this statewide action plan. So as a statewide convening organization, OAESV has put together 4 separate work groups based on your area of practice to join. And right now, these work groups come together on a monthly basis. There's a 90-minute call. Sometimes it goes a little bit over, to share ideas, to share policy, to share practices. You know, some are community-based, some are education-based, depending on what area of focus that you have. So that's one tool that we will be incorporating into this plan, is to really make sure that agencies are aware. So we talk a lot about communication. So it's our duty to communicate that these work groups are present and that folks are welcome to join them. So communicating that an effective way across the state to all partner organizations. And then really, how can we work with each organization, each individual organization, to make sure that there is capacity to have their organization represented in these work groups? Because that's the other side of that. As people are working, and we just talked about having lots of roles, this can feel like another layer of something else that's added on top of what you're already doing. But in the way that we present that, we have to present it in such a way is that it's a structured opportunity that can offer you some sort of relief for the things that are on your plate. Because we know that effective partnerships and collaborations do offer that. Because it's like, oh, okay, somebody else is going to design the flyer, so all I have to do is manage the list. I don't have to do both, right? So when we begin to build those relationships, then we can have productive work groups, as we speak of, and even something like a cohort program. So another thing that we're starting, just getting ready to start, is a particular program for those people who work at an executive level. So whether an executive director or a program director of, particularly, we're looking at folks who work directly in rape crisis centers, to pull those people together in a structured way, to meet with them on a regular basis, and to provide the same content for everyone. So that relieves another layer of that collaboration, particularly for people who are working at a director level, right? This is giving you time and space where it's providing you professional development opportunities, but also contributing to the bottom line of your organization by being able to really develop these partnerships with other collaborative organizations so that they can be symbiotic, so that everyone has an opportunity to benefit from them. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is even like local collaboration groups. So we talked about work groups that are for frontline practitioners that are issue-based, even for like a formal facilitated professional development cohort program for folks who identify at a director level. Something else that we are also looking to implement is a local collab. So thinking about a regional collab, something again that meets on a regular basis, but that gives us an opportunity to share information with one another. I see the question in the chat about the statewide policy and advocacy agenda. So that's something that we have one work group that focuses on policy and advocacy. And so they will be, at the forefront of leading that conversation. But these work groups are open to everyone. We have an opportunity here for you all to sign up, to drop your email if this is something that you want to be a part of, a work group, a local collab, a focus group. We want to pull as many folks together from this particular call or meeting to share out in your own organizations, and bring everyone back together to continue to have this conversation about what are you doing already in your organization or institution to advance this work. A big piece of our plan is knowledge construction, because we know that this work is happening. We know that you are not empty vessels. And we're not coming in to give you all of the tools and resources that you haven't been doing this work. So we feel it's so important to capitalize on what you're already doing. So we want to curate spaces for you to share that work with us. Where do you see the work that you're doing fitting into the plan? So with those three ways in particular is some of the ways that we really want to amplify the voices of the folks who are on the front lines doing the work. So thanks so much for that question, Lynn. Dr. Ray or Nicole, you want to jump in?
I just put the link in the chat, and I see some folks have joined us. Thank you so much, Nicole, for creating that Google Doc for us as an awesome backup. So feel free to drop in any specific feedback on the goals that we've discussed. And I see folks are down on partnership and collaboration and community impact. Thank you so much. I'm also going to add, feel free to drop anything anywhere on the screen, but if you see me scrolling, is to add a box for our email addresses. We would love to get any feedback, or if you would like to join a focus group later this summer to discuss this in more detail, we would love to have you.
Maybe there's an opportunity here to talk about something that came up earlier, which was the idea of valuing qualitative data in the same way that we value quantitative data. And I'm wondering how people are sitting with the option for the third piece here around building a community of practice, which I think, does this feel like a good sort of like meet in the middle? We're going to shift 50% or more of roles, right? So we have a quantitative piece, but there's going to have to be, right, some qualitative components, because we want to know how people are moving towards more equitable, anti-oppressive organizational culture. So we know that, yes, we'll have a 50% data measurement piece, but the qualitative opportunity to do storytelling and counter narrative exists there too. And I wonder how people are sitting with that metric and how we can include more qualitative feedback there. And that is number 3 on your list. Oh, it's coming through. This is great.
Definitely. And also, if there is, how are you already doing this? So even if you feel like maybe you're not doing it, it's the most effective way that you can, how are you already doing it? I think that's important to share out in this space, is that it may be a non-traditional way or a non-conventional way that you're doing it, but that's important.
That's right. We really want to value the fact that none of this is assuming that you're starting from scratch. None of this is assuming that you've never done any of this before. So really valuing exactly where your existing place is right now is really important. So we want to hear from you. Okay, we've got some in the comments here from Megan. State plans can seem overwhelming. People open it and are like, what is my role as a local agency? Great question. Can we give an example of an action step that applies to each of the 4 focus areas to give people a chance to see where they are already doing the work, but not using the same language? I'm going to kick that to Dr. Ray and Dr. Arki to see if we can kind of co-create some examples of each of the 4 focus areas.
Sure, I'll take that because I see Dr. Ray is working in the doc. So thinking about what an action step that would apply to each of the 4 focus areas. So one action step that could really go across the board for each of the 4 areas would be to review your policy and procedure manual. That's kind of number 1. I see Nicole shaking her head. When we work with organizations, that's really where we begin to do this work, is to say, how are you communicating who you are, why you're here, the purpose that you're here, who's your target market, and how you want to be, how you want the folks that you employ to be in relationship with one another and then with the client. So that becomes step 1. And it sounds like, okay, that's step 1, but that takes a bit of time to go through and really get the feedback that's necessary from the people that you serve, from the folks that matriculate through your organization, but then also the people who work there. So we can really look at that as a stakeholder process. So looking at all of the relationships that you have with the organization and how are we presenting these relationships in a manner that whether it's a client or a board member, we're saying the same thing. And even if the client is speaking or the board member is speaking, the messaging is the same because they've received it in a very unified manner from the organization or institution. So that policy and procedure review becomes a large first step, and that's something that will come as one of the goals under the state action plan, and even in the programs that we're talking about, particularly where we're working with directors and program directors of Ridge Crisis Centers. That is the first action step that we will do with them, is really go through a particular policy or procedure that affects folks the most and really support them in updating that and making it transformational as opposed to transactional. So I don't know if Nicole, you wanted to give another example, or Dr. Rex.
Sure, happy to share some other examples. Great. So, it's so true that we have to make this like accessible to each of us. When we look at it, if we don't see ourselves, it can be hard. So as I think about just even that first action step, cultivate and advance effective SIPV prevention programs that include a social justice framework. If we're going to cultivate and advance something that's working already, then I think a great sort of step there is to make sure you have a way to identify what's working in that program, right? And that might mean creating a way to say, okay, any social justice or any prevention programming that we're going to advance has to have these three components, because we know that this has worked really well in these metro areas, right? Or maybe in rural areas, it needs to have these 4 components, or it has to have this extra piece. So I think taking some time to identify what's working and why will give you a baseline of understanding, just a baseline of how you might then continue to advance and grow that across the state. But remembering that it is statewide and that, those changes happen across region, locality, rural, urban, it's important to then kind of make those adjustments. So a great first step might just be what's working well, why is it working well, and then try to get to the kind of the components you can identify that are giving you that success, and then adjusting for region and location.
I see an awesome comment burgeoning in the focus area number 2 for the statewide policy and advocacy agenda, but I wanted to add a specific example that may be more practical and reachable moving forward. But how this may look, how it has looked for the State Action Plan Committee is that for focus area number 2, we took some real time to identify the characteristics of anti-oppressive organizations. And that's what Dr. Arki went through earlier on that table. That's something that we worked through with the State Action Plan Committee and continue to use as a guiding force and framework to say at every step and at every turn, are the steps that we are hoping to put in place falling within this table, falling within this framework, and is all the work that we're doing truly anti-oppressive in its approach. And so having that table, having some type of guiding force really makes sure that there's some pinpoints that can be really measured in ways that are useful. And so that's one step that we definitely already put in place. And again, a lot of these steps are live and in color. And so that's what we're doing here today, getting your feedback.
And just to follow up on, I'm sorry. Before we transition off of this, I just want to respond to the last part of Megan's question that was in the chat to talk about language. Language is so important. And that's another thing that we have discovered with the committee with doing this work. So one thing that we've committed to doing as the consultant team is to co-creating a glossary of terms, if you will. And so that document is actually in process. It's attached to the state plan as we have it. But to understand that when we say, tomato and someone else says tomato, we're talking about the round thing that you can slice up and put on a turkey sandwich, or that you can dice up and make salsa. So once we understand that that's what we're talking about, it makes communication so much easier. So I think that also becomes a foundational step between all of us working together, even in not just the verbal language that we use, but also when we are writing our grants, when we are reporting back on those, to speak with this unified language that really amplifies the voices of those people who we are here to serve becomes a way that we can use to build power. Thanks, Nicole.
I was just going to ask, I wondered if, since some of this is already in practice, right, which is really great. And I'm wondering if anyone on the call has an example or maybe something that they're working on now that it feels like it does fit, any 4 of these. We'd love to hear from you directly, hey, I've been working on this. My language might feel a little different. It's tomato, you've written tomato, but does this fit into, action step number 2? And we'd love to hear from you, maybe even troubleshoot a little bit of that, just to give you an opportunity for some feedback and do that very thing that Dr. Arki just talked about, which is find that connectivity, find that shared language so that we're all on the same page. So wondering if folks have an example we can lift up. I see some things actually in the document.
Right, I saw that too. I was trying to give folks an opportunity. But the listening circles, that sounds so amazing. The goal of what that is very similar, very aligned to what we're speaking of. And even like the Photovoice project too, right, Nicole?
Absolutely. I don't know if the person who added that wants to kind of give us a little more context for kind of how you arrived there and what the response has been, but this is a great place to share that, hear from others and let us sort of like give you some shine for offering a couple of different great options. And if not, that's okay too. We know folks are zooming hard, but I would add that the idea of the listening circle is really like an opportunity to kind of get really direct feedback. And we know that that's predicated on relationships with your community and with the folks you serve directly. That determines who shows up at those listening circles, and the work of evaluating who's here and who's missing still applies. But the fact that you're doing that work really, really makes a huge, great first step or interim step. And then the idea of Photovoice, I'd love to hear more about that. It sounds like a beautiful melding of kind of outreach and sort of using tech, but I'm making an assumption. So if there's more to add, please let us know.
This is Rin. I was the one that put it, and I was hoping that Caitlin, one of my staff, would talk about it because she's the one that's like implementing these things, but she's driving right now. So I will share a little bit, and if she wants to jump in, I'd love for her to. So the listening circles really came from our strategic plan. One of our strategic plan items is we developed a vision statement, communities free from violence and depression. And a part of our strategic plan is really figuring out what that looks like, both internally within our own agency, but then also within our communities as well. And that's really where that came from. So we've been working to pinpoint data where the highest crimes happen in our community, which we kind of knew, but have data to back it up. But we feel like that qualitative piece is so important, like everything that you've been saying. And so hearing what the community says, what they need, what they see. So we've been working with our city councilors in 3 of the wards in our community and meeting with them, and then expanding out to meet with community members based on some of the recommendations from those city councilors, but then also our own connections for those of us who live and work in the community, and then also going to different events in the community and inviting folks to attend those listening circle sessions as well. So we were just at a Juneteenth celebration this past weekend, so we're talking to people about if they live in any of these 3 wards to attend those. So that's kind of where that developed from, and we're our first one hasn't happened yet, so it will be happening in about a week, and we're really excited about that that process. And then for the Photovoice project, if you're not familiar with what Photovoice is, it's using it's taking pictures for social change, essentially. And so we actually decided to do this with youth in our community. So we have a group in one of our rural communities, and then we also have a group in Lima as well. And we really are focusing kind of the same question, like, what does your community look like free from violence and depression? And so the youth are meeting every week with Caitlin and with Carla. And Caitlin is actually a photographer as well. So we're talking about what that means, but then they're also learning a little bit about photography, which is really cool too. And so they're going to be editing those photos that they're taking and talking about them every week, why they took the photos, what that means to them. And then they're going to have a chance to kind of display that in the community as well. So that's a brief description of what those 2 things are, but we're excited about both of them and learning what all of this means in our community too.
Thank you for that, Ren. Really appreciate some of that context and just, recognizing how often it is that we make decisions without getting any input from the folks that we're centering. And as we talked about earlier, our work isn't just to make an assumption about what people need, but it's actually centering the most impacted. And then a great initial step is just to begin talking and, more importantly, listening. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. And that becomes an example of a program that, can be easily duplicated or replicated, particularly with working with young people. I mean, I think Photovoice works with all of us, right? But I have definitely experienced the success of it with young people, also, particularly around state violence and their reaction to that. And so being a part of networks like that, hearing these stories, but then being able to connect with the folks who are actually facilitating that program, like Ren and the team at Day One, to see what the logistics of it may look like, sound like, and feel like. The first question that I'm sure everyone will have is, okay, how much money does it take to run that program? Right? And that's not a conversation that we have to have here, but now that you all are connected and begin to build those relationships, that's a conversation that you can have. And then once we really expand this conversation across our stakeholder group, that money may even show up. So once we're having that conversation in a work group, there may be a local grant opportunity that's arising for young people to become active in their community, right? And so this is one of the ways in which we really want to amplify the voices of young people as they respond to what's happening in their lives. And all of the statistics tell us that young people communicate very differently than we do as adults. And the imagery has become their number one way of communicating. And that's through photos. And y'all know what the other piece is, emojis. But that's another call, it's another workshop. We'll talk about that one later. Thanks for your emoji response. So yes, I'm seeing a couple of folks who have done Photovoice projects. Excellent, excellent. So if you want to jump in and share that, please do. But anyone else, will turn it over if you want to jump in and share another example, or if we have anything we want to highlight from the document that people have been adding to. I see it's going.
One highlight that that really makes things very real. I really appreciate this contribution that says we have a local prevention collaborative that includes not just SV and IPV prevention, but also suicide prevention. and et cetera, was just my thought in thinking about local and regional collaborations. And we're really appreciative of that contribution because it definitely has come up more than a few times in conversation, the ways that we can expand beyond what the particular topic areas and service areas that we're working on as organizations to expand to service programming that intersects with these same issues, right? And so that intersection is definitely critical when thinking about the various needs that communities are facing and how they may be impacted in one area, but also impacted in all of these other areas as well. And so it definitely has come up in conversation and what that web of needs may be, what that maybe map or hybrid of needs may be, so that we're really looking at the whole person or the whole community instead of looking at a singular issue, right? Or a single story. And so super appreciative of that contribution and that feedback.
In addition to those things that I've mentioned, to follow up on the local collaborative, I know that there is a collaborative in Cincinnati, in the Cincinnati area, that focuses on women of color, particularly queer women of color, and it's called Hey Girl Hey. And they've been doing social programming for a number of years, but they have a deep desire to move into action-based programming. And so when we think about our stakeholders and how we begin to build those relationships across lines of difference, that's another collaborative, thinking about being able to get in touch with. Another one that's in Northeast Ohio is the Cleveland Collaborative for School Age Health. So they do provide support services directly for sex education, providers, preventionists. But again, it becomes another place in which we can begin to immerse ourselves with diverse stakeholders who we can find those intersections, because just like the communities that we serve are diverse and intersectional, our institutions have to become that way as well. So being able to build these relationships across these lines of difference really puts us in position to continue to and to better serve our constituents and the people that we serve. I just wanted to add on to that. Thank you.
I love that. And thank you for lifting that up. I wonder, this might be a good moment to kind of like do an internal check, and you don't have to respond, but I wonder how many folks would have imagined that a queer women of color, LGBTQ women organization might be an apt place to do outreach for intersectional approach on the very topic we're discussing, right? There might be some assumptions around, whether or not they'd be the partner to reach out to. And the truth is that the folks there, and Tammy Lunan is, leading the charge in a lot of ways there, find this to be a top priority, right? So sometimes we have to kind of just gut check and say, they probably aren't interested, and stop and say, well, let's find out. Let's not make that assumption, because their approach is incredibly wide-ranging and intersectional, and it's really, housed in Black feminist thought around all the pieces and parts that have to be addressed for Black women to be free. And we know that, once Black women are free, a lot other people gonna be free too. So we really want to kind of just take a moment and think, man, would I have thought to reach out to Hey Girl Hey? Maybe, maybe not, right? It's a great practice to kind of check our assumptions.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Nicole. Anyone else? We want to open the floor. Leave it open for folks to contribute through the chat, through the document, or add your voice to this conversation. All right, so I want to spend a little more time just in reviewing the document. Before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about something that I did get in the chat that I think is really important, an important piece for us to talk about and be intentional as we do this work. And it's about our own personal pedagogy and how we show up doing this work. We've talked extensively in this session about our organizations because of what we're doing, strategic plans. And that is important. But what we know about organizations and institutions is that they are ran by people, they are ran by us. So in addition to the organizational work that we do, we have to do our own identity work. And I know that that work is coming through, particularly at this conference, right? Through your keynotes and your other breakout sessions, as folks are sharing their personal journeys around how they got here, how folks are connected to their roots, how they're amplifying the message of the communities in which they serve, and sharing those tips with us as conference goers or conference participants. But as we move forward, it becomes really important for us to realize that our own intersectional identities affect our pedagogy, how we show up with others. So the baggage that we have, all of the experiences that we've had in our life, the good, the bad, the indifferent, the positive, the negative, all of those things we carry with us. And as we seek to build institutions where people can bring their whole selves, right? That's what we're talking about, is looking at our institutions, adjusting our policies and procedures so that people can bring their whole selves. An additional responsibility for us as practitioners is making sure that we're doing our work to know how to utilize our story of self. How do we use our own story to connect with the story of now, which is those folks who you are in community with? So it could be your colleagues, it could be the folks in community that you serve. And then thinking about what's our story of now. And so if we really place our story of now as a statewide collective of prevention-based and education-based organizations, how do you see yourself fit into that? Where does your story fit into that? Which pieces of your story are you privileging sharing with your colleagues? Which pieces do you privilege sharing? And then also, even in the things that you may not verbally share, how do you show up in that space? So understanding your identities, right? And particularly thinking really about our race, our ethnicity, our gender identity expression, and the role in our organization. How do we amalgamate those identities to really begin to amplify the message of the most marginalized? It's no secret, we can look around this work and we understand that when we look widely, when we look broadly, even through certification programs, education-based programs for the type of work that we do, that's community-based, that's education-based, that's prevention-based, the majority of the folks who operate in these fields identify as white, identify as female, identify as college graduates. But when we look at the statistics of the people in which we are serving, those identities are multiplied and magnified over 1 million times. So it becomes so important that we pay attention to what we're saying, what we're doing in our organizations, but also how we as individuals show up and how we contribute to that change, verbally, the things that we do, the habits that we have, the practices that we bring to that organization, and then also how we are in community with one another based on those intersecting identities. So I just wanted to speak to that a little bit. I know that's a little bit off from our plan, but that'll be one of the action steps, is really beginning to do your own work. And there are tools that this strategic action plan, and in partnership with OAESV, to provide you with that are really centered on your identity as a provider and the work that you do in Ohio. So we are excited to share those opportunities with you as well. So I want to turn back to the document. Anything else that we want to highlight in the document, Dr. Ray?
No, I see awesome feedback and awesome affirmations, but in terms of potential resources or next steps, we did get a link from one that was recommended from one of our committee members. So I have to thank you so much. But other than that, very much appreciative of the conversation thus far.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Nicole, you want to jump in?
Sure, are we gonna go back to the document? Okay, so, one of the things that's, equally important that we just heard Dr. Arki talk about is the work of understanding what is the large scale work we have to do institutionally and structurally. What is our independent individual work, right? And then what's the kind of like middle ground work in a space like this one in a coalition, which is really important to name. And I think you're beginning that work, or you're in the midst of that work, or you've been in it in a long time. And I think that highlights another important piece from the document, which is that there are challenges to expect. And I think that instead of going in with either a sense that this is going to be too hard, I don't want to do it, or to be going in and thinking, I've got this new awareness about the world we live in, I'm going to fix it all. We can go in and have some sort of level setting, right? We can go into the work of embedding social justice and embedding diversity, equity, inclusion, and intersectionality with an awareness that we need to build support systems so that we don't burn out, so that we have people who might share our approximate level of knowing and understanding and analysis. Because if you're going in and have a long history of working through working for justice in your field, but maybe not as much of a clear understanding around how oppression operates broadly, you might find some disconnect with someone who's been in it for a much longer around justice and anti-oppression. So we want to make sure that you all have an understanding that in addition to these spaces, it's important to build community with folks who are on the journey with you. So you can anticipate that you have partnership, right? The other piece that's really important is to acknowledge those different dynamics and dimensions that Dr. Arki talked about. If someone is, in a position, hierarchy exists in all of our organizations in different ways. But if you have maybe some younger or newer or just folks who don't have as much positional power in your organization, but they have clear ideas and interest in deeply committing to anti-oppressive techniques, they may feel stifled because of their lack of positional power. So we want to identify all of those components and recognize that some great ideas can come from folks who may not be in a leadership or an executive position. So we really want to kind of make sure that you both have an awareness that yes, this work is challenging and difficult on its own, even without the thoughtfulness of an anti-oppressive DEII approach. But in order for everyone to feel, equipped and remain proximate to this work, we want to build support systems. You want to look out for support systems both within your organization, also with folks with whom you share like identities, so that you have spaces to process things and not putting kind of additional labor on folks who are traditionally marginalized anyway. So those are just some things that are coming up for me in this moment, and hopefully some of that resonates for y'all.
Thanks so much, Nicole. So thanks again to all of you for being here, to the presentation team. We do have a few more minutes left in our session. We were anticipating this group to be a little chattier, but I think maybe we caught you after lunch, and so maybe there's not that much dialogue happening. But really, this was really designed to get your input and your feedback on the state action plan. As you see, we've been working on it. It's been really intentional to make sure that it's not just this document that lives in a binder on the shelf. It has to include the work that's already happening. It has to have the voice of the people who are on the front lines doing this work. And it has to be representative of Ohio and what Ohio looks like, sounds like, and feels like. And so we continuously invite you into this process. Our goal is to have this plan completed by the end of the year, but we invite you to join a work group. We invite you to participate in any of those professional development opportunities that are put through by OAESV. There are affinity groups. There are work groups. There is a self-guided anti-oppression training for folks to be able to go through. So really, and even this conference with so much attentiveness paid to the type of work that we do. Often we are in spaces where we get continuing education, but it's not always focused on us specifically. So these are rich opportunities for us to pull from. And I just want to encourage you to continue to do that and continue to share with us the work that you are already doing so that we can include that work in the plan. You have the link to the document. We ask that you drop your email there if you want to continue working with us. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out to us. We have just a basic email, sanfocuscircleinternational@gmail.com. We'll drop that in the chat also so that you can reach us. But we want to hear from you. Your voice is really important. Your voice and your action is what is going to be the action steps and the key activities for this plan. And it's so important to get you involved in this process. So we have a couple of things set up for work groups already, encouraging you to join those, reach out to us to share individual stories. And we thank you. We thank you again for the work that you do every day, and then also for joining us. And please enjoy the rest of your conference experience. Thank y'all so much and have a good day.
Thank you, Dr. Arki, Nicole, and Dr. Ray for kicking off this wonderful plan. And I hope that I want to encourage everybody to be part of the work groups. It is not the Beth, Deb, ODV, and everybody else's show. It's your show. It's our plan. It's our statewide plan. And so I know people are waiting for the code word, and the code word is Ohio, OHIO. Then I hope you will join us for the closing session this afternoon. And if there's any other questions, people can put it in the chat. If not, we'll be ending this workshop. Thank you so much.